Ever think about the ghosts of tech past? Those really ambitious projects that sort of flickered for a moment and then just vanished.
Oh, absolutely.
Ah.
Happens all the time.
Well, we've got a really fascinating one for this deep dive. Windows 10X, remember that?
I do, yeah. That was
That's
Microsoft's big play for dual screen devices, wasn't it? A future that, well, is still kind of unfolding.
Exactly. And what's so interesting, I think, is looking at these projects that don't quite make it.
You see all the innovation, the rethinking that goes into them, even if the final product doesn't ship quite as planned. It's like a window into their process.
Totally. So for today, we've dug through some pretty cool material. We've got this detailed list of known builds. It almost feels like an archaeological dig,
Yeah, like reading the rings on a tree.
Right.
Huh?
And we also have a references section linking out to articles, plus a dedicated overview just called Windows 10X.
Okay, standard stuff for our deep dives.
So our mission, basically, is to figure out what Windows 10X was supposed to be, why it got the axe.
And what pieces of it might still be around today, maybe hidden in plain sight.
Precisely. That lingering impact. Okay, so let's dive in. What was Windows 10X, fundamentally?
Well, in simple terms, it was a version of Windows that Microsoft canceled before release.
Okay.
Its big selling point, its focus, was to run on both regular single-screen tablets and these new emerging dual-screen gadgets.
So not just shoehorning desktop Windows onto a tablet, this was meant to be different.
Exactly, a real departure. They weren't just adapting, they were building something specifically for those form factors.
It wasn't just a skin, right? I remember hearing it was built on something different underneath.
You got it. It was built on Windows Core OS.
Windows Core OS.
Right, which is, well, a more modular, more streamlined foundation for Windows. The overview doc even links it back to the ill-fated Polaris project.
Ah, Polaris. Another ghost.
Seems like this wasn't their first attempt at making Windows more adaptable.
Makes sense. When did 10X first pop up?
The announcement was October 2nd, 2019. So not that long ago, really.
Yeah, it feels quite recent. I got a lot of buzz, especially with those dual screen Surface devices they showed.
It did, but, well, things took a turn.
Clearly. It didn't exactly take over the world. What happened? When did it fizzle out?
The timeline is pretty telling. Development basically got put on hold in February 2021.
Okay.
And then, boom, officially canceled just a few months later, May 2021.
Wow. That's a quick life cycle for something that seems so ambitious.
It really is.
But as you hinted, the story doesn't just end there with a cancellation notice, does it? Our sources say bits and pieces lived on.
That's right. This is classic big tech R&D, isn't it?
Mm.
Some functionalities, some tech developed for 10X got folded into other things.
Like Windows 11, maybe?
Windows 11 seems like a prime candidate, yeah. And maybe other Microsoft products, too. The work wasn't totally wasted. It just got repurposed.
Okay, so a specialized OS, new foundation, aimed at new devices. Let's get a bit more technical. Under the hood, as they say, what made it tick?
Well, technically, it was still part of the Windows 10 family, NT 10.0, so it shared some DNA.
Right, not completely alien.
No, but it embraced newer stuff. It was built for both x64 processors, your standard Intel AMD stuff, and ARM64.
Ah, ARM64, big focus on mobile, low power them.
Definitely points that way.
Yeah.
And the last known build, according to that list we have, was 10.0.20279.100.
0.02, got it. And the overview mentioned different product types. What devices were they actually targeting?
Yeah, they listed a few. Modern PC WCOS-CDG probably means always connected PCs, maybe.
WCOS, Windows Core OS, maybe. CDG, Connected Device Group. Just guessing.
Could be. Then there was modern PC low cost, which sounds like they wanted it on cheaper hardware, too.
Makes sense for wider adoption.
And the really cool one, Centaurus.
Centaurus sounds epic. What was that?
That was widely known as the internal code name for Microsoft's own dual-screen Surface project. The Neo, I think it was called publicly.
Ah, the Surface Neo, right. Okay, so built on Core OS, what did that mean for how it looked and felt, the user experience?
Well, the big change was a totally new UI stack. It used DirectX for rendering.
DirectX, like for games.
Yeah, same technology. And it used UWP APIs, the Universal Windows Platform stuff for the apps and controls.
So moving away from the older Windows graphical system.
Pretty much. It suggested a more modern, maybe more efficient way to draw everything on the screen. A visual refresh from the ground up.
Okay, but what about all the old Windows programs? The huge library of Win32 apps everyone relies on. That's always the challenge.
That is the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And they had a specific plan for that. The core Win32 subsystem was still there, apparently.
Okay.
But the old US or UDI graphics stacked the thing most traditional desktop apps use to draw their windows and buttons that was gone from the main OS.
Whoa. Okay, so how would, like, my old version of Photoshop or whatever run?
Virtualization. That was the plan.
Containers or VM?
Exactly. The sources mention running them either via remoting, like streaming it from a virtual machine, or using a purpose-built container right on the device.
So contained sandboxes for the old apps.
Precisely. It would keep the main OS cleaner, more secure maybe, but still give you a way to run your essential legacy software.
That's a pretty fundamental shift, decoupling the core OS from direct legacy support.
It really is. And it hints at where Microsoft's head might have been at regarding the future of Windows architecture.
Fascinating. Okay, let's talk about that list of known builds. This looks like a goldmine. It's broken down by code names: vibranium, manganese, iron, cobalt.
Yeah, this is like a roadmap of the development process. These different branches, they probably represent different phases or maybe parallel tracks focusing on specific features.
Let's see. Vibranium starts early, April 2019. Build 18875. Then a couple more builds through September 19. Seems like the initial ramp up.
It looks like you're probably getting the CoreOS basics working, initial UI ideas. See those prefixes?
Yeah.
Murray's release.
Yeah. Internal testing milestones.
Probably. Standard software dev stuff.
Then we hit manganese. Wow, look at this list. Builds from 19504 all the way to 19603, stretching from, looks like early 2020 to about April 2020.
Yeah, that looks like a really intensive period. Lots of builds, lots of activity, probably when they were really building out features, refining things.
What about these prefixes here? Arsone Core Dep, RSFX.
One core might suggest work integrating it with the shared Windows core components, FX, maybe framework. It's hard to say for sure without being inside Microsoft, but it suggests lots of moving parts coming together.
Then comes iron. Starts December 2020, build 2274, goes up to 2281. And look at this prefix. Fearlease 10X.
Fearlease. That strongly suggests feature experience release, maybe.
Yeah.
And the 10X is pretty explicit. This looks like they were gearing up for an actual release.
Right. This was probably meant to be the final stretch, refining things for launch in late 2020.
Seems very likely. And then there's just one Cobalt build listed, 21319. Higher number, seems later.
What do you make of that? Future work? Or maybe just internal testing that continued after the main push?
Could be either. Maybe testing ideas for a future version that never happened, or just ongoing engineering work. Hard to tell just from the build number.
It's like piecing together a puzzle. Okay, so we see all this activity, this push towards release with the iron builds, which brings us right back to the big question: why? Why pull the plug?
Yeah, after all that work, what happened?
The sources give us some pretty strong hints. That Windows Central article is key.
Right, it said 10X was put on ice because Microsoft shifted focus. They decided to prioritize rejuvenating the Windows 10 desktop instead.
Which, makes a certain amount of sense. Windows 10 had and still has a massive user base.
Billions of devices, right? You can't ignore that. So maybe the calculation was focus resources on improving the core experience for the most people right now, rather than launching a new OS variant for a niche market.
And the Windows Experience blog post kind of confirms that, doesn't it?
It does. It talks about taking key functionalities from 10X and putting them into the Windows 10 May 2021 update and into other products.
So not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. They salvaged the good bits.
Exactly. It wasn't a failure in the sense that the work vanished. It was a strategic pivot. The R&D investment paid off, just in a different way than originally planned.
Okay, so it wasn't a technical dead end, more like a change in strategic direction. Which leads us nicely into those lingering questions. What is the legacy of Windows 10X?
Yeah, even though it never launched, what ripples did it cause?
The obvious one is Windows 11, right? How much 10X DNA is in there?
That's the big question. Visually, Windows 11 has a more centered interface, rounded corners, a focus on simplification, things that were hallmarks of the 10X previews we saw.
Yeah, the visual language seems related.
And the push towards modern apps, the improved Microsoft Store. You could argue the groundwork was laid or accelerated by the 10X effort. It's hard to draw a direct line without internal knowledge, but the influence seems plausible.
What about that Win32 virtualization stuff? Did that idea go anywhere?
That's another really interesting thread. While Windows 11 still runs Win32 apps natively, the idea of containerizing legacy apps for security or stability, that hasn't gone away.
You mean like with Windows Sandbox or some of the enterprise virtualization tools?
Exactly, and maybe even informing future approaches. Could we see a future Windows version where legacy apps are run primarily in containers, borrowing from the 10x concept? It's definitely a possibility for improving security and modernizing the platform.
It addresses that core tension, how to stay modern while supporting decades of old software.
Precisely.
And finally, the dual screen dream. 10X was built for that. Is that vision dead at Microsoft?
Well, Windows 10X as the OS for that is gone, obviously. And the Surface Neo device it was supposed to launch on was also shelved.
Right.
But Microsoft did release the Surface Duo running Android.
Yeah, the smaller phone-like one. Different beast.
Different beast, runs a different OS, but it shows they haven't completely given up on dual-screen hardware. The interest in multi-screen productivity seems to still be there. Maybe the lessons learned designing 10x's UI still inform how they think about Android customization on the Duo or future experiments.
So the ghost of Centaurus might still be influencing things, even if indirectly.
Could be. The dream of a truly optimized dual-screen Windows experience seems dormant for now, but the underlying concepts might resurface.
Okay, so wrapping this up, our deep dive into Windows 10X paints a picture of, well, serious ambition, a ground-up rethink for a new device category.
Yeah, built on that modular Core OS, new UI, that clever virtualization plan for old apps. It was a big swing.
But ultimately, strategy shifted. Focus went back to the main Windows 10, now Windows 11 experience.
And the best ideas from 10X got absorbed back into the mothership, basically. It wasn't wasted effort, just redirected innovation.
It really highlights how these canceled projects aren't always failures, are they?
Not at all. They're part of the process. You learn things, you develop tech, maybe you discover the market isn't ready or your priorities change. The knowledge gained is often incredibly valuable down the line.
Absolutely. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many other projects like this, big bets that didn't quite land as planned, are quietly shaping the tech we actually end up using every day?
Yeah, the unseen history behind the screen. Definitely something to think about.